All right, welcome everyone to Salary Negotiation presented by Career Services. Today I'm going to run through some of the salary negotiation techniques, strategies, tips, why negotiate, to go over kind of all things negotiation if you go into a job offer scenario. So I wanted to begin this with kind of the why negotiate. I get a lot of people who, especially if it's their first job, you're not quite sure if you should, if you shouldn't, if it's a fair offer. But I wanted to highlight here how important the negotiation truly is. You can see here that in the first year, so if you were accepting a position, if you start at $50,000 versus if you start at $55,000. So say you negotiate and get that five grand. Look at the difference over a 20-year career in salary, only if you do get a 3% increase annually. So assuming you get that 3% every year. In the end, though, you can see that salary one ends up at 87,675, whereas the person who negotiated to salary two is going to end up just under $100,000. And so I think here is just a good explanation of why that starting salary is really so important as you go into this. And so knowing that at the beginning of your career is actually the best time to get to a higher salary, to negotiate, and how much that's going to carry you forward. Now, of course, I'd hope in 20 years you may get promotions or you may leave that position and begin again, so that 3% may change. But if you are just simply looking at it, that first starting number, just know how important that salary is. So it is important to negotiate. It is a good time to do it. And so hopefully this will carry through the rest of the presentation today. So I wanted to, when you're going into a negotiation, you want to practice and you want to be prepared and anticipate responses that you can have going into the conversation. I think a lot of people are kind of like, well, we'll just see how the conversation goes, kind of wing it. But I think that's a little bit unrealistic. I think you have to be prepared, and you know, if anything, you'll be like me. Don't be like me the first time I ever negotiated, where I was just kind of like, okay, this is what I'm going to go into. He was like, what do you want? And I was like, this number. And he was like, nope, we're going to give you this. And I was like, great, thanks. And I think I just wasn't prepared for the conversation. It was my first job out of college, and I think not being prepared really hindered me. And I came to realize after that I lost out on a lot of money because I did not negotiate that first time around, but I didn't know any different. And so this should help you to prepare some responses, prepare for those conversations so that you're ready for it. And I know that if you are just looking at your first position, that it can feel a little bit hard to negotiate. And so hopefully this will help you feel that you are skilled, you do have the qualifications to negotiate right in the beginning. And so here, when you're thinking about going into a negotiation, if you're in an interview process and they call you back for that second or that third interview and you kind of feel like, hey, this may turn into a job offer, you want to start preparing for that. One of the first things that I do is I want to show my value. I want to know that I can speak to my skills, my qualifications, accomplishments, and the outcomes that I've had in my past work experience that will show them that, yes, I am a great candidate for them. And so I like this kind of format here where I accomplished, and you'd put in whatever task you accomplished using whatever skill you used to achieve this outcome. If you start to think in this kind of terminology, in this framework, this is going to help you in the negotiation, because if they say, well, why should we give you more money? You now have something to kind of back up your claims that you're worth more money. And so again, employers, they want the best. They want people who have had outcomes. And maybe you haven't worked in the field before, but I guarantee that there's something that you've done, some outcome, some accomplishment you've achieved that will showcase that you are a really great worker for them, that you'd be a great employee. And so you want to think of a couple of scenarios, a couple of examples you'd have going into this. They could be things that are stated on your resume, but they can also be things that you have since, outlined for them in the negotiation process. It shouldn't be a surprise to them, but it should be something that you can back up with. Here's some tangible evidence to back up my claim. So from there, the next step in the negotiation process is to determine what your worth is. You want to have have done some research on what your salary should be. And so I really like salary.com. There's a lot of resources out there. Salary.com does have a free version where you are able to research comparable salaries based on your position and also the location that you're looking to work in. It's really important here to think about location because the salary will change drastically if you're in the Bay Area versus in the Stockton local location or wherever you may be across the country. It is really important to take into account what is the cost of living in that location. And so that's why that you do want to be searching based on location. Now for the job title or the position, I do think it's important to kind of play around with the titles a little bit. Not every title is, transfers to another position or another company, but when you're doing this on salary.com, what they're going to have you do is look at job descriptions of different position titles, and you're going to select the one that you feel like best fits the position that you're interested in, that you're applying for. And so once you determine the correct job title and location, you can select here, you see the image here where it says get my salary estimate. And what it's going to give you is this. It's going to give you that bell curve that you can see here. The example I'm using today is Human Resource Generalist 1. I use the location of Stockton, California. As you can see, that median number, that 60,000, that is going to be the median number. If you are perfectly qualified for Human Resource Generalist 1, that's a fair salary for the Stockton location. Now, if you don't meet quite all of the qualifications for a position, you may be a little bit lower than the median. And on the flip side, if you meet and exceed many or all of the qualifications put in the job description, you can then look at a little bit above. But typically that median number is a really good starting point when you're negotiating. And the terminology that I want you to become familiar with here is called target salary. And so the target salary is that median number, but it's really the number that you'd be happy with. It's the number that you're shooting for, you would be excited for in this. Now, based on this research, I think a good target salary would probably be $60,000 or $61,000. I think that that would be an appropriate number based on the research. And so if I was negotiating and going into this negotiation process, I feel that I would be shooting for about 61, maybe just a little bit above that median. Now, with that being my target salary, when you go into a negotiation, you never want to be in a place where you just give one number. So you always want to give them a range. I will tell you that you don't really want to give the number first at all, but if you get in a place where you have to give a number, it always is a little bit nicer if you can give a range. And here, what you're going to want to do is you're going to take your target salary and move up. You never want to go below because that way, even if they give you a number within the range, it's going to be a number you want. So you'd be happy with the 61, but hey, I would be happier with anything from 61 to 67, right? And typically when you're looking at what would be an appropriate range for you to determine, I usually look at about 10% for an entry-level position, go about 10% above your target salary, and that's usually a good range. So if you do the 10% here, you can see that the target salary range would be 61 to 67. If you are later in your career, you may extend that. It may be, 15 or 20% range. That may be appropriate as well. And so for a human resource generalist 1 position, the target salary would be 61 and the target salary range would be 61 to 67. And the nice thing about salary.com, you can see where it says paid annually. You can also adjust that. And so you can select biweekly or weekly pay. You can also change it to hourly. And so if the position you're looking at is not paid annually, it's paid hourly, you can adjust that and to see what the difference would be so that you're giving the range in either the kind of hourly wage or you can give it in the annual rate. So within negotiation, this is something, the monthly budget is something that you would want to think about. You maybe don't have a budget. If you've never budgeted before, this is a really great tool, a great kind of strategy to use when budgeting. If you have, I would just say look at your budget to help kind of determine how can you live within your means, what salary would be appropriate for you. So for the typical rule for monthly budget is kind of this needs, wants, and savings. So your needs would be like your bills, like your utilities, your rent, your mortgage, if you have a home, insurance, car payment, things that are kind of like you absolutely need to, pay for this. Your wants, on the other hand, would just be things that kind of your flexible spending. It's entertainment, it's hobbies, it's travel, it's really anything that you don't necessarily need, but to live a happy life the way you want to, they're things that you want. And then on the flip side of that, you also have your savings. So this is going to be things like your retirement. This is going to be things like, any debt you may be in, things that you're going to help with kind of financial savings for the future. You can see at the top here that about 50% of your monthly budget will go to your utilities. That's a pretty fair baseline. Again, it may be adjusted slightly, but about 50% will be your needs. I would say 20% is really going to go into your savings, which is going to leave you with that about 30% for your wants, your flexible spending. I will say that from month to month, it may change a little bit. If you're traveling one month, you may save a little bit more the month before. So again, it may change, but you kind of want to generalize what is your typical monthly budget. So I put together just a monthly budget here, just to kind of show you that the first column here is the needs, the next three in the second column are wants, and the final two would be savings, just to show you what a sample budget will be. This is very condensed down. There is much more that you typically have in a budget, but I wanted to show a quick example of what this may look like. Now you might be kind of thinking, how does this impact salary negotiation? Well, partially it doesn't. This won't come up in your conversation when you're negotiating. This won't be a part of the conversation, but it is really important that you know these numbers going into it, because you may have to determine, well, what's appropriate for you? What's a salary that you can live with? Now, can you make cuts? Can you have a smaller budget each month and get by and be happy? Yeah. But it is important to kind of know what your number is going into the conversation. So this is going to be it's a good tool. It's a good habit to get into if you don't have a budget to start budgeting. But really use this as kind of a framework in the back of your mind as you go into a negotiation process. So with that, you do want to also determine, in addition to your target salary range, and your budget, you do want to know what is your walk away point. The questions here: how low is too low? When will you walk away? I think those are important questions to consider, because again, if I think about my experience when I was going into a job, I was like, I am a graduate. I just need a job, any job. I just need to make money. And I don't think that I was as prepared as I could have been to walk away if I got a salary offer that was just too low, that I knew based on my research and based on my qualifications that was too low for me to accept. So what you want to do is you want to think about what's an appropriate walk away point for you. If we think back to the human resource generalist one position, kind of looking at that 61,000 median, you may want to think about, okay, well, how low would I be able to still accept and be happy and accept this position? And I would say for that position, maybe for you, maybe that's 55. But maybe it's 53, maybe it's 51, that 10,000 in between there. Maybe you would still accept the position at that point. There's no right answer here. It's what you would determine as being appropriate. And so you just need to know what this number is, because it's going to help you stick to that in a negotiation. So say you get to that moment in the negotiation and they say, we would offer you 53. And you're like, my walk away point, my absolute lowest I could go is 55. And if they can't get you to 55, that may be a point where you truly have to say, thank you so much for the opportunity at this time. That's not a salary that I feel that I can accept. I do really appreciate you working with me, but at this point, I do need to end my, candidacy for this program. It'll help you stick to this number. Now, there's a few reasons that you may go to a lower number, and that might be if this is a position where you're guaranteed a promotion in a year or two, and you're guaranteed to get to that number, get to a place you want to be, and you're like, yeah, I could do that for a year, you may then accept a lower salary for that time frame. But for the most part, you want to stick to that walkaway point and have that number ready in your head. So if you do get to that number in a negotiation, that you have an easier time ending the negotiation process and ending your candidacy. So once you have all of these numbers kind of put together, the next thing you want to think about is benefits. And I would say that I did not know as much as I should have going into a negotiation about benefits. I wanted to highlight that here and spend a little bit of time with that. Here's a list of a number of benefits that you may receive from an organization. Typically, when you receive an offer, you are given a salary number and you're also given the benefits package. Now, the benefits package, you do want to think about this very seriously because benefits ends up being about 30% of your total compensation package. And so benefits are so important, and I think sometimes we get hung up just on the salary number and kind of forget about what the benefits look like. Um, Here you can think about family medical leave, flex time, health insurance, life disability insurance, parental leave, retirement, sick time, personal time, paid time off, tuition, vacation, moving, stock, title change, professional development. I will say that there are benefits that are negotiable and there are benefits that are non-negotiable. There's some that they just are what they are. They cannot make any changes for you as an individual. And I will say for the non-negotiable ones, these are typically things like health insurance, retirement plans. Those are typically non-negotiable items that they have based on the entire company organization. That's the structure that's in place. Sick time, a lot of that is just, it is what it is, and they can't make adjustments on an individual basis. But there are benefits that are negotiable, and you want to think about what is most important to you. And so in some industries, vacation time is negotiable. In some it is not. And so again, we can kind of do some research on that, but you do want to think about, is vacation really important to you? So if it is, that may be one of the benefits that you want to negotiate. If they offer you 2 weeks of vacation time or 10 days, they offer you that time, would it be appropriate for you to negotiate another 3 days? You could think about, is that what's important to you? Or if you have to change locations and move to a new city for this position, maybe they would want to negotiate moving expenses. I will say this is a fairly common one if you do have to move for the position to ask for, because on a company standpoint, it's a one-time expense. And a company may be more likely to offer you moving expenses because it is just that one-time expense, as opposed to giving you a higher salary, because that would be a continuous, expense on their part. So you want to think about that. There also are some benefits that are non-monetary, like title change. Maybe you're coming in as a specialist position, but maybe you've looked at the industry and you notice that coordinator is more the terminology that is more accepted. So maybe you want to see if they would adjust your title. So there's not money tied to that title, but maybe that title would stand alone and be something that would be very helpful for you in the future. You could ask for that. And so those are things that you can negotiate. And I would say that professional development is usually kind of a guaranteed negotiation point as well, to assume that you do get some sort of professional development, continued learning, certifications, training, webinars, conferences, whatever it may be. That is something that's usually on the easier side to negotiate. With all that being said, you don't want to come into a negotiation and be like, I would like to negotiate my salary, professional development, my moving expenses, vacation time. You don't want to keep listing a lot of options. So here I would usually select maybe two. What's most important to you? You may have things that they would talk about and they would make changes on that maybe aren't as important, but you want to really focus on what is. And so with that, you may just pick maybe two things that you would really want to focus on as being most important to you, and those would be the things you would choose to bring up in a negotiation. So we've talked a lot about kind of the preparation, the preparing for the negotiation conversation, but now I want to kind of change gears and talk a little bit more about how does the actual negotiation go? And one thing that I've recognized is that sometimes employers try to put you in a position where you have to give a number first. So they might be, before they even make an offer, they might say, well, what was your previous salary? And if you answer that question, you kind of put yourself in a bad spot because they might say, well, if I offer you just a little bit more than that, you'll take it. And I think as an entry level professional going into a position, a lot of times I'm like, my previous salary has nothing to do with this job. You know, my previous job is not relevant to this. And so, for one, this isn't relevant, and you don't have to share this information. And so, what I would do, and you can see here, is that deflection. So, you want to deflect this question. You want to not give your previous salary, if at all possible. Now, there are laws stating, you know, can they ask this question in the negotiation process, or can they put this on an application? And depending on what state you're in, you can do some research and find out if that's something that they can ask for. But ultimately, I would just say that you want to come up with a deflection response so that you don't give a number. So for what was your previous salary, my typical response would be something along the lines of, my previous work experience was a little bit different than the current role that I'm interviewing with you for today. And so I'm not sure that my previous salary would be relevant for this position. So you're still being polite, you're still being professional, but I'm not giving a number. And most of the time, that's the way that you would approach the situation, if that's the way that you would come into the conversation. Most employers are going to be like, okay, absolutely, no problem, and they'll move forward. On the other hand, an employer may try to get you to give a number of what you're currently looking for their position. So they might say something along the lines of, what are your salary expectations? If they do say this to you, they're looking for you to give a number. And as you can see on the bottom of this slide here, when you give a number first, you lose power in the negotiation. And so you're going to do everything possible to not give that number. And so if they flat out say, what are your salary expectations? You want to come up with a response that is not just saying, well, my salary expectations are this number. So you might say something like, I'm sure what you have budgeted for this position, and having looked at my qualifications and skills that I would bring to this role, that you would make a fair offer. So again, you're being professional, you're being polite, you are saying, I'm sure what you're going to offer me is fair. And most employers in that case will be like, okay, absolutely, you know, that is fair. We do have a budget for this position, and I'm going to move forward and make the offer. So again, a lot of times these are questions that are happening kind of at the end of your interview process, right before the negotiation happens. And so if they say that, you know, come up with a response, put it in your own words, and practice saying it where you're not giving the number. Now, you can see the third question here. Some employers might kind of push back to that. So if you give your response and don't give your number about what your expectations are, they might say, you know what, in order to make you an offer, I do need to know what are your salary expectations. If they push back like this, you know, it's not my favorite approach on an employer side, but it may happen to you. And if it does, I want you to be prepared. And so if this does happen, you need to think about what you're willing to give here. Now, again, like I said before, I never give a number, just a point blank number, but what you might do is, this is where you might have to share the range that you were looking at. So you might say, well, having looked at the research for comparable positions in this location, I feel like this range of 61 to 67 would be appropriate. But I would love to see what offer you would make, you know, should we move to that point in the conversation. At that point, you're saying, I've done research, that I'm backing this up. This is not just a number that I've come up with. And with that being said, you know, then you're able to you put it out there as best you can, and also know that you're not locked into that range. But at that point, you're saying, hey, this is generally what I'm hoping for, what I'm looking for, but I'm flexible because I'm giving you a range. I'd be happy with anything within that. And then they can say, okay, we'll move forward into the negotiation process, and they'll make the offer from there. So again, if you're pushed into the corner and backed in the corner and you have to kind of give that response, that's typically what I would recommend, is to give that range. So now we're going to get into the actual negotiation process. And so this would be kind of looking at some negotiation verbiage. So I want you to think about, to start the negotiation, right? So say that an employer has given you an offer. They said, here is the starting salary we would like to begin you with, and here's the benefits package that comes with that. Now, you can say, the best thing that I would do at that point is to say, thank you so much for the opportunity. I'd love to review the offer, and can I get back to you? Give yourself a minute to review it, because there's nothing worse than continuing this conversation when you're not prepared. And so you can take it home. Typically, you're going to respond to them within 24, 48, or possibly 72 hours. So typically, that's the time frame that they'll give you to review it. If you're lucky and you get kind of a Friday offer and you have the weekend, then use the weekend to review it. But what I want you to do for that point is review the offer, determine what you want to negotiate, and be prepared to come back into the negotiation with those numbers and with the pieces that you want to negotiate ready. And so you may, I know I was always having a hard time with, like, well, how do I start the negotiation? What do I say? So when you call back, or when you reach back out to the employer, you may say, thank you again so much for the offer. I have reviewed it, and I'm wondering, do you have any flexibility on the salary offered? For me, I like that language. You can make this fit your own language and what sounds natural for you, but for me, I like the flexibility piece, because it is a really great way to kind of think about, what options do I have, or what options do you have as the employer? Are you flexible? Because they might say, hey, no, this is the top salary I can give you. It is what it is. Well, great. Now you know that salary isn't off the table, that you can't negotiate that. But they may say, well, we could look at this a little bit. What do you have in mind? So then right away, it's going to start the negotiation conversation. So I like that a lot for starting the conversation. Now, say that they've made you an offer that's below your target salary, below the 61, going back to our example. So a typical response that you could have here, as you see, would be, thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm really excited about the possibility to work for your company. However, with the skills and qualifications that I can bring to this role, would you be open to discussing a higher salary? Now, this is something that I would typically say. I like that, like, thank you so much. It's appreciative. It's excited about the option. One thing you do want to remember, that this is a conversation. You're not battling them. And if you really want to work for them, tell them that. Tell them that they can get you if they are willing to negotiate, right? Like, you don't want to make this seem insurmountable for them to kind of hire you on. And so you do want to be appreciative and say, thank you so much about the possibility. I'm excited. And I do have some skills and qualifications, and I might state what those skills and qualifications are. This is kind of going back to that value add that we talked about in the beginning. This is where you can come in and say, well, having done this at a previous employer and having this outcome and being able to bring these same skills to your company, would we be open to discussing that higher salary for me? In many cases, they're going to say, well, okay, sure, what are you thinking? Or they kind of go and carry the conversation from there. So then you get into the negotiation. And I will say, remember that negotiations don't always happen all at once. They may say, well, we do really want you. I will have to go talk to HR, talk to my company and my hiring manager, whoever it may be, and see what I can do. So they may go talk to them, and then they'll call you back and continue the conversation. They may be prepared right away to come back and give you a new number. Great, you already are doing the negotiation and you've not given a number. And so that would be kind of the negotiation process. But now let's say that your offer is at or above the target salary that you were hoping for. If you're really happy with the salary and that looks really good, great. You can take the position from there. So I would just say something like, thank you so much for this generous offer. I'm very happy with this salary. Would you be open to discussing some of your benefit options? So remember in the negotiation process that you are not just negotiating salary, the benefits come up as well. And so then you'd want to be prepared. And a lot of times when an employer would respond to that response by saying, sure, what benefits are you interested in discussing? And that's where you can come up with those 2 options or so of what's important to you. You do want to give the ones that are most important to you, because you don't want to give an employer an easy way out and kind of say, well, okay, if this isn't, out of the 3 options you picked, let me pick the easy one, just to feel like they're giving you something. So you want to be specific and selective about the options that you do pick and make sure there's something you care about. And one other note that I would make here is that when you negotiate, you want to negotiate simultaneously, not serially. So you don't want to get through the whole negotiation process on the salary and then finally get to a number and be like, thank you so much for working with me on the number. And now let's talk about this. And then, oh, wait, what about this benefit? You don't want to keep adding things. It's nice in the beginning to say, I would like to talk about a higher salary and this benefit, or whatever benefits it may be. You want to outline those up front so that they know that these are the 2-3 things that you want to look at. And then you can go through negotiating each of those pieces. It sounds better than like adding it as time goes on. You don't want to be like, thank you for negotiating the salary. And one more thing again. So like I said that before, I just think it is important to have that conversation all at once. But say they give you the offer and you're happy with the salary, great. Right away, go into the negotiation for the benefits. To put this into practice, I do think it's really important, probably most important of anything you're going to take away from this presentation today, is that you need to practice this. Just like interviewing, just like you would practice interview answers, you're going to practice saying your negotiation tactics out loud. If you've never said it in your own language, in your own verbiage, they're going to be able to see that, and you're not going to feel as prepared going into the conversation. So you want to actually practice having this conversation. And one way to do that is to put together a scenario for yourself and one other. So you would pick one person to play the employee. And with the employee, you're going to have a target salary range. So your target salary in this example would be 50,000 to 57 would be that range. And so you want to go into negotiation kind of thinking, okay, I'm going to shoot for 50. At the same time, you may ask a friend, a colleague, someone who you trust, a family member, whoever it may be, to play the role of the employer. And then for the role of the employer, you want to give them an employer salary range. So give them a starting offer, give them a maximum budgeted. As you can see, it's a little bit lower, but there's some overlap, right? The employee is looking for 50 to 57. The employer cannot go higher than 53. And so once you kind of set up a scenario where you give each other these numbers, now you can play around with the numbers. You don't have to, you could have the person who's playing the role of the employer give themselves a range, same as you having done some research. You can play around with these numbers, but if you give numbers like this, then you could go and role play this out. And when you do that, you may come up with like a beginning question. And so the person who's playing the role of the employer could then say, okay, so tell me, what are your salary expectations for this role? And that would allow you to put into practice your deflection. So how do you not answer this question right away? And then on the employer side, they would be able to carry this forward and say, okay, I understand. Here's the offer we would like to make you. And then from that offer, you would be able to question or kind of look at the offer, look at the number they gave you, and come back with a response and practice putting this negotiation conversation into kind of that role play. And so when you do that and you're practicing how you would say it, you'd each play this role. You can then switch the roles, you can play around with this activity a little bit, but I want you to really practice that out loud and actually say language out loud. I know I've tried to use kind of other people. They're like, oh, I really like to say this. And I'm like, oh, that is harsh. That's not my language. It's not how I would phrase it. Or, oh, that's a little softer than I would like to say. I want to be more assertive in my conversation. Whatever kind of response it is, I know I've given you some examples of verbiage, but you need to find what feels right for you and make sure that you'd be comfortable saying it. So Lastly, I just want to go over a few more tips. I want you to know that you can prepare notes for possible reactions, for responses. You can prepare all of this and have this with you when you're in the negotiation process. Many times you're doing negotiation by phone, email. Every now and then it is in person, so be prepared for that too. But you can bring your notes, bring that with you into the conversation. So if you know you're getting in that second, third interview, why not have this information ready, and you can use your notes as you go into it. And then the other thing I want to remind you is stay professional, stay polite. Just, remember that you ultimately want to work for them and they want you. If they're making you an offer, they're excited about you. They want to bring you on. And so remember that this is a mutual, you want to show mutual respect. You want to have a mutual understanding at the end of this. And you want to come out of this in a situation where you want to work with these people. So you don't want to burn bridges right at the jump from the negotiation. So remember that you actually want this. So stay polite and professional as you go through this. I would say if you do get any of the negotiation to happen, make sure that you get this all in writing. In many cases, this is a contract that you will be signing. And so things like the start date, things like the salary, if any of those things have been adjusted from your conversation, make sure that at the end of the negotiation, you can say, thank you so much for working with me through some of these. I'm very happy with the adjustments that we talked about making. Would you be able to adjust the offer letter, and I will go ahead and sign the contract. In that case, then you would review that offer letter, make sure that it is stating everything correctly as you discussed, that it's all in writing, and then you can, before you go ahead and sign, so then you'd be able to sign. And I will say, when you go into negotiation, I do want you to aim high, but I do need you to be realistic. I know a lot of people say like, oh, it'd be great to come out of college and make, 100,000. And for some professions that may be fair, but many, if not most, that would not be. And so you do want to be realistic when you're going into this conversation, do research. Some employers will try to lowball you, but you don't want to come in so high that it's going to stop the negotiation before it even happens. So be realistic when you go into this process and use the research to kind of back you up. And then again, remember not to give your desired salary first. Try not to give a number first unless you get backed into the corner and you have to give a number, and then remember to give the range. And then negotiate simultaneously, not serially. So remember that you're going to put all the pieces you want to negotiate out there first, and then go through the negotiation of each of those items. So these are, some tips that are great to remember as you go into the process. So that is everything that I have for the salary negotiation process. In Career Services, we are happy to talk you through salary negotiation and put this into practice. We can practice verbiage with you, whatever would be helpful. And so if you do get an offer and you want to reach out to us, we're happy to help. Remember, you do have free services with Career Services for Life. And so our contact information is on the bottom here. Reach out anytime. Thank you for listening today. And reach out anytime.